Hello all, thanks for coming. I see some familiar faces. Familiar, sorry about that. It's been, what, 6 months or now?
Exactly 6 months to the day.
It's been 6 months that Tony Sand has joined, or rather, has been appointed to lead the team at St. James Cavalier. For those who don't know him, which I doubt there's anyone here, Tony Sand is our artistic director. He was appointed after a process, after a very long process. Which I'm happy to say, although it took quite a while, but it was very interesting, and we learned a lot even as a foundation. For those of you who don't know, there's a foundation behind this institution, and I chair it, but the main protagonists in the foundation are the artistic director and his team. We try to make life easier for them. We fight off and fight against usually government institutions to make things run smoother and faster. That's mainly our role. May I now give over to Tony? So he started this 5th meeting over there. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much, Rupert. The fact that we chose today to have this session is indeed because it's the exactly 6 months since I was appointed artistic director, and the long process that Rupert mentioned was because there was a substantial amount of applications for this post, and many of whom were incredibly valid candidates, and as you would expect, a handful of them were very, very worthy competition for myself in relation to this. I came to this post mainly through presenting a strategic vision for the Center for Creativity, which is what I will be presenting to you over the next few minutes. Once we've done that, or rather once I've done that, I will turn to my 3 guest interlocutors here to start a conversation. This is a conversation that is actually a continuation of a number of conversations we've had in recent months. These conversations have been quite well attended, I would say, and the conversations have been in Maltese. But we saw it fit to have now, one of these events in English, particularly for those of us in the creative sector here in Malta, for whom Maltese is not a first language. And as you will see even from my guest interlocutors, this is indeed something that is essential, that we keep in mind that we don't only use our national language, but we use our other official language, which is English, along with Maltese. These are the 2 official languages, as most of you will undoubtedly know. Normally we have a slightly different setup too, because we have more of these screens around the room, and I came to see the setup earlier today, and I said, "Where are the screens?" I said, "Excuse me, you asked for them to be set up elsewhere," and indeed I did. And I think, I should know what I'm doing a little better in this way. But when it comes to my own work, I suppose I'm like the shoemaker, as the old Maltese expression goes, who needs to mend his own shoes rather than mend also other people's shoes. The reason we only have 1 monitor here today is that we have a video installation downstairs in the main hall, which I will invite you all to come see as soon as this session here is over, which essentially brings together all the salient points that we've been looking at in this series since last November, when we had the very first event in this series. I think it's best if I move on to present this strategic vision to you in very simple terms, really. I think that the main thing to say is that this is based on 3 points that you see here on the screen, and they are identity, outreach, and legacy. Outreach is a word that I've also chosen to phrase in terms of diversity, but diversity in terms of difference. And I'll speak a little bit about this more, but in essence, these three goals, these three strategic goals, line up with 3 questions. Identity in terms of who we are, or rather, who are we? The outreach diversity question is who do we work with? And the legacy thing is what do we do, particularly in terms of what we may leave behind for future generations. Essentially, if we think of each of these now in turn, and we say take a closer look at this idea of identity, I would say, well, Rupert in his introduction mentioned Fondazione Centro al Creatività, which is the legal entity that is really charged with running the activities that take place within St. James Cavalier, but also St. James Cavalier itself in various ways. Also, there's this idea of creativity hub, or creativity hubs, perhaps. You know, I was quite amused when PBS reinvented Rediffusion House, which was built in 1957, into something that they called a creativity hub after it had been closed down for about 8 or 9 years. It indeed is a hub of creativity, but I'm not sure where that leaves the Center for Creativity then, if the PBS hub. So, you know, again, this is a question of identity, I suppose, and what the relationship is between that and others. Also, whether St. James Cavalier is a venue where events happen, which is available for hire. Is it, or is it something else, or something more than this? Which spaces do what? This is a theater. The number of non-theatrical events I've been to in this room, this I suppose would be one of them. Some people could say, well, yes, this is a theatrical event. Well, perhaps it's a performative event rather than a theatrical event, but let's not split hairs, at least not just yet. But what to do, which spaces do what, I think is a useful question in terms of the concept of identity when we discuss it in relation to this strategic vision of mine. And then, do we work with programs? Do we work with projects? What gives us our identity? And I would say it would be programs and projects, of course. And then again, there's an idea of what the brand is. And we are, as some of you will be aware, in the process of a rebranding exercise to make the identity of this 15-year-old organization now perhaps a little clearer to some of us who aren't necessarily entirely sure what the relationship is between Fondazione Centro al Creatività, the legal entity, Centro al Creatività, the main organization that runs programs and projects within, or rather under the umbrella of the Fondazione, as well as what St. James Cavalier is as a space that is available for various sorts of things to happen within its walls and even beyond its walls to some degree. And then again, with this matter of identity, there's another point that I'm particularly interested in raising, and that's looking at balancing quality and inclusion. And I think this is something that I will want to come back to again later, because quality is the sort of thing that you would most certainly expect from any institution operating at a national level, and reaching out internationally, of course, as well. But also inclusion, in as much as we operate here with public funds. So there are people who may feel that it's right, and I would agree with them, that we are more inclusive in the way we disperse public funds at a Center for Creativity. So essentially what we're looking at here is a clarity of vision or a clarity of mission if you will. One of the things that I like to think about is the relationship between these three key terms: creativity, art, and culture. Clearly, you know, these are very intermeshed with each other, but then how do we distinguish things like creative expression from entertainment, and where does arts education fit into all this? And what about things like professional development? But the question I'd like to ask myself even, to keep me on my toes, is what's so special about St. James Cavalier? And I think that's both a kind of a question that says, well, there's plenty that's special about St. James Cavalier, but at the same time, you know, is this a one-of-a-kind kind of organization, institution, place, space, pick whichever one of those terms you'd like to use, and the answer will probably be slightly different. So anyhow, this is in as much as the concept of identity. Moving on to the idea of diversity or outreach, as I was calling it previously, I then clearly proposed looking at the different aspects that you see here on the screen, the regional, the sectoral, the thematic, national, and international approaches to outreach. And you see some of the keywords or the key participants, if you will, in each of these dimensions. Particularly of interest here, which is one that brings all these together, is the artists in residence program, or idea of artists in residence. We were very much involved as an organization in an open method of collaboration that ran across member states of the European Union recently. I see my colleague here, Dr. Georgina Portelli, and another colleague who I don't see here this evening is Patrick Fennick, who are both very involved in establishing a policy with guidelines for all European Union member states when it comes to artists in residence. This report was published only recently, and it's now available even through the St. James Cavalier website. So also, what do we mean by having artists in residence? Are these people who just come here to Malta, spend a few weeks, and who don't interact or provide much to the community that's here? What about others who go from Malta to other countries to be involved in exchanges, perhaps, and residencies? And so, anyhow, this idea of outreach and diversity is one that I think is at the heart, really, of what we do. It also relates to two very, very basic points that have developed more clearly since I first presented this strategic vision. And one is, what are the types of activities, if you will, that we should be engaging in? And so diversity here in the sense of a biodiversity, so a healthier sort of a mix. And the other is, who are or what types of audiences should we be engaging with? And clearly we should most certainly be wanting to engage with types of audiences who are not ones who may perhaps find programs or activities that are of interest to them within our program of activities. Particularly, I think this also relates to the educational role that the organization has. And when we say an educational role, we're speaking at various levels of education here. I mean, clearly, not just schools, higher education, but also arts education, particularly the plethora, if you will, of the smorgasbord of private dance and drama schools that exist in this country. But especially, I think, informal education. Which is something that I strongly believe that we also, as a Center for Creativity, play an important role in this idea of informal education. So in this way, we, I think, are very well placed to offer opportunities for arts education through workshops, lectures, master classes, sometimes even in collaboration with some of these private drama or dance schools or what have you, and other types of organizations, as well as some of the ones that are in, private, including university, IMCAS, and anyway, you see some of these listed on this slide. But also, again, schemes or a scheme for professional development, some of which may relate to the Artist in Residence program, which I mentioned earlier, as well as this new drive for internationalization that has been cropping up in recent years. In fact, in terms of internationalization, I think this relates specifically to the government's plan for internationalization, and by which I refer to things such as the launch yesterday of the Cultural Export Fund, which was launched at the Malta International Airport with Sfin Malta going to take part in the Ramallah International Dance Festival, for example. But also, of course, expanding that or extending that beyond that sort of thing. Durable and active exchange programs, an export office, which clearly is something that will and is in the making in relation to this export fund. And my vision is that we, as a Center for Creativity, are active participants in this, if not leaders, through our involvement in the Artists in Residence program and in offering a point of reference nationally for that sort of activity. Collaboration agreements with voluntary organizations, NGOs, even other national entities, including educational ones, cultural ones, and so on and so forth. But also memberships in networks. We are members of a number of networks, and these are now listed on our website, and perhaps participation or creation of new networks. One that we're actively involved in, for example, now, is a Cities of Culture Knowledge Exchange network. So that is to say, bringing together different people from cities of culture to exchange knowledge, essentially. I guess the title explains itself. So this brings us on to legacy, really, because I think this idea of knowledge exchange really is at the heart of what the concept of legacy that I put forward really goes to the heart of the matter. Clearly, the first thing that comes to my mind is archiving, and so physical and digital preservation of knowledge, essentially. I guess it's a very simplistic. I see Milena here smiling because this is an oversimplification, I suppose, of what I'm trying to present here. But also documenting performance and documenting art, which is an area which some of you will know is my area of specialization in my other life as an academic. So what I seek to see developing through this strategic vision is looking at documenting performance or documenting art through as a systematic part of the creative cycle. But also a sense of legacy of going beyond Valletta 2018. So thinking what the 20th anniversary for the Center for Creativity will be like in 2020, or the 25th anniversary in 2025, or perhaps the 50th anniversary in 2050. So later, please, Nancy. Later, please, Nancy. So essentially, what we're trying to do here is start a rehearsal, if you will, for this sort of thing now, which is essentially the 15th anniversary, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity to speak about that a little later. I see I'm running out of time, so what I'll do is I'll summarize very quickly this idea with identity essentially leading to a clarity of vision mission. So the big question there was, what's so special about St. James Cavalier, really? Diversity, this idea of balancing quality and inclusion, especially through membership in networks and the creation of new networks, not only international networks, but also ones on a national level, as well as this concept of legacy. So if you will, I think this is an easy way to think about it, going beyond Valletta 2018. What we really plan now must go beyond Valletta 2018. So ensuring future impact through active archiving is one way I would put it. Now, in time, and thank you for prompting interventions from the floor, we will be seeing what you make of all this. And that will come to you in about 15 minutes or so. And the kinds of questions that I would have if I were in the audience is, so who are we? And what do we do and why? And who do we do it with and why? And who knows it? And who do they know it? How do they know it? You know, and that sort of thing. Or how, what remains and how and why? So these are very, very basic questions. But I've invited, as I said, 3 interlocutors who will hopefully share their perspective on this strategic vision, because I've already spent some time discussing this with them. And I am particularly enthused by what they have to say. You too can have your say, not only here as we speak this evening, but also through this email address that you see on the screen. But also through other ways that we have that you can communicate with us very clearly. So what we'll do is I'll introduce each of our guest interlocutors as we go along.